individualism versus collectivism. Now, I chose this topic because we talked about advantage and privilege last time. And I think that's a nice specific topic that connects to identity very well. But this idea of who you are as an individual and when you find yourself acting in your individual interests versus when you think of yourself as part of a group and act in your group interests, I think underlies so many things that we're all going through right now. It's a way bigger subject than most people realize. It's so big and theoretical. I think it doesn't get discussed as much as it could. So I thought we would chat about about that today. I'm very curious what manifestations it's going to take in our conversation. Does anybody have any ideas that it sparked when I just sent a quick email before this and said, how do you think of yourself as an individual in relation to or in contrast with the collective? Anybody feel like jumping in?
I'll jump in if you don't mind.
Sure.
So two things came to mind. I think it was a really good prompt for you to be like, oh, I feel, this kind of helped me to identify the groups that I feel like I belong to or that I identify. So that like came to mind first for helping me identify. But then the second thing is I studied linguistics and culture a bit in university because I did a double major in international business and French, but the culture studies and linguistics was like really interesting for me. And so there are these different dimensions for how you characterize different countries called Hofstede's dimensions. And one of them is individualism versus collectivism. So different places in the world, different countries in the world, it's like a spectrum and they fall differently. And so the United States is like a highly individualistic place. Like I think it's the most, and then Asian countries are like the most collectivist. So I think this is interesting because within our own groups or countries or cultures, like there's a different, maybe we fall somewhere differently on the spectrum. So these are just two things that I kind of was thinking about when you brought up the topic.
Yeah, that's great. I think I've actually seen that where they actually score individualism and score collectivism based on a number of factors. And it's fascinating to see how they're ranked. You know what? It would actually be a good idea. Thank you for reminding me, Maddie, for us all to kind of go around and let's just start with how much you think of yourself as an individualist. I mean, there's something inherently American in that. Mm-hmm. And I believe we were all born in America. So maybe I can start and then we'll kind of go around. So I think of myself as a person that is like quite a born and bred individualist, where I am a big believer in the American idea of exceptionalism, the idea that you can start from nothing and work super hard and become really prosperous and have a very happy life, which are two separate things, of course. And that's exciting, and that measuring yourself on some sort of hierarchical scale or competing with others is, the type of system you're participating in when you are engaging in this individualism or exceptional individualism. I didn't choose that. That was just the culture that I was born to, and the way it was talked about in my community. It was mostly talked about in the sense of striving to go to college, and especially a good college, and then becoming a doctor or a lawyer and becoming rich. Maybe, I think in my household, like marrying somebody who is good looking and give you good looking kids. It wasn't said so bluntly like that, but I think that was important. So all of it contributed to quite an individualistic upbringing. And the idea of collectivism, what can we do to contribute to the world? Or maybe what could I do to contribute to Judaism or something like that, or any other group that I might identify strongly with. Those were very weak ideas. There was a little bit of Judaism that was, there, but I think of it as a goal of mine to become a little bit more collectivist. I think of future Evan when I'm 60 or something, I'm going to be acting in the collective's best interests in a greater proportion. And that's important to me. I want to contribute more I think, to a small collective. I'm not sure which ones, but I'll stop there. That's kind of where I'm starting. Grace, do you mind going next?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard because I try to live with a very collectivist mindset because I want everyone to do well because I think when everyone does well, the whole does even better. But at the same time, I've lived a lot of my life in fight or flight response, which makes it so sometimes I force myself, I end up being more focused on individualism than maybe I should be because I'm worried about survival. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily the mindset I want to live in. And so right now I'm trying to find a balance between how can I further myself and better myself while at the same time creating a better world for others and helping other people reach opportunities because I'm a firm believer that everyone deserves a basic human needs and rights, and also the pursuit to gain something and make something if they have the tools or need help. So that's my thought. It's definitely, I'm not perfect at the balance yet.
Sounds like both are swirling around quite a bit. I hear plenty of individualism in there. Not meaning that like individualism is selfish, but there's the survival orientation and then the striving that you talk about. And from the last dialogue, I know that you're a person that really strives,
Yeah.
and that's more individualistic, at least I think. But that's interesting. I'm going to see how that. I'll be interested to see how it develops. Um, Ethan, can we go to you next?
Yeah, it's a. I don't know that I have a simple answer, but what I was thinking about. I mean, I definitely pushed comes to shove. I'm on the individualistic end of things, perhaps with an aspiration of becoming more collectivist, but also being pretty okay with my the way that I am. I think something that I was thinking about is I think a big influence on me was like reading fiction was like a very formative experience in my life. Like, in some ways the most formative experience. It was like all I did for a long time. And I've realized as I've grown up what a sort of niche set of influences that had on me, where like almost by definition people who write fiction are pretty rejecting of society and the way that most people do things and the way that the kind of collective lives. And it's like still sort of surprising me to realize how that's not the influences that everybody has when they're 17. And I think that's very core to who I am, to sort of be an extreme skeptic and to really not have a very high esteem for the way that the kind of groups do things. Um, and a lack of a desire, a sort of rejection of like big groups. And at the same time, there's like areas of my life where some sort of affinity for the group can be quite strong, but I think more in small groups than in some sort of like larger like nation or sort of identity sized groups, which I don't necessarily feel. I mean, there's special cases like Evan, you and I have talked about with like COVID. That's like a situation where like almost for I felt a stronger affinity than I ever had before for say the like 300 plus million mass of people in the US, and felt more connected to the choices I made in my daily life. But I'd say more generally, I can feel a strong affinity for local groups. Like I do I don't think I'm that individualistic when it comes to, say, friendships or, the workplace or my school at all. But when it comes to sort of larger society, I think that plays a smaller role in my life.
Thank you, Ethan. You bring up a lot of interesting things that maybe we can jump into once Maddie has shared how she relates to those ideas. But yeah, just the idea of if, can a group be so large that it's very hard to feel a connection except in a special circumstance like what you were talking about with COVID, is an interesting question. And do you feel more connection to people that have traits that are like you? I mean, it seems like that's certainly so, but when can we go beyond that, and you can feel something for all kinds of people that are not close to you in many ways, or similar to you in many ways? It's a very interesting question. But before we go into that, Maddie, how about you?
Okay, so I will get into kind of like the drivers or like the stimulus that have kind of formed my falling on the spectrum of collectivism versus individualism. So first, coming from the US, very individualistic, but then I'm from like the Midwest, which I would say is probably one of the most collectivist places in the United States. And I grew up in like a Catholic family, which I would also say is a very collectivist sort of grouping. So in the United States, I grew up further on the spectrum, closer to collectivism. But then when it comes down to like my own upbringing, I think it was very individualistic because I was moved around so much as a kid. There wasn't a lot of like stability with like, I am living with this mom and dad like my whole life. It was like this family member, these people, da da da. So my individualism really developed. And when I was like 4th grade to 8th grade, I was by myself a lot. So I think I kind of grew up in a mentality of like, I become my own best friend. Like I take care of myself. At the end of the day, I have to take care of myself. And then also like the passion, the drive to go and explore the world. I did most of my traveling by myself. So this self-reliance like just grew stronger and stronger. But then I saw other cultures that really cared about collectivism. When I was studying in Finland, I just saw like groups of Asian people, Vietnamese, Chinese, Taiwanese people, and they were always in like huge groups together, and they just always stuck together. And I was like, this is crazy. And you know, the other cultures kind of gathered together as well, like in this setting, just naturally because they're speaking the same language. But I was the only American, and so I just kind of like jumped around. But again, I always do this. Like even when I went to high school, I never belonged to a group. I always like hopped around. But there's another part of me, which is that I'm extremely like empath. Like I can feel other people's feelings, and I always want to accommodate others. And so in this way, I would say I'm very collectivist, is that I'm very sensitive to my environment and the people around me. And I kind of want there to be like a good energy. So I'm tapping into it and I'm trying to do what I can to make sure the energy is good. And then the last point I will say, where I noticed my proneness to being more individualistic, when I arrived in Mexico, where I've been since May, I joined my friend from France and another girl from France, and we traveled around for like 2.5 months. And I would say French people are much more collectivist, much more kind of traditional, gathering together, having meals together, taking care of things together. And I remember like the first month, it was really nice because I was in a foreign country and they were just like touring me around, and you know, they would make food and this was really nice. But then I remember it's kind of like, I need to do my own thing. I need to decide I want to eat this or do that. And I could feel that like maybe there was some tension or resentment growing because I was craving this as a more individual person. So yeah, I think that covers all of the things that kind of came up to me for the drivers of where I land on the spectrum.